I'm so excited to share this time with y'all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being on time. That matters to me. And I'm looking forward to see what Julie and you guys have to share with being more emotionally well over the holidays, tips and tricks. We want to have a conversation with you. So please use the chat. That is really important for me so that I know if there's confusion, if we need more clarity, if you want to add something, that is why we're doing a live webinar. It will be posted on my YouTube channel once the recording's all done and I can get that all set up, hopefully this afternoon, this evening. I will do that. So if you forgot something, you want to go over it again, know that we will be posting that. As a reminder, we are not medical doctors. We're not diagnosing. We aren't trying to cure anybody or prevent any disease. We're sharing things that are important that we feel can be helpful for your emotional and physical wellness because of the way God designed our bodies so beautifully to thrive. I'm Dr. Kari Barron. I'm a naturopath. I'm not a medical doctor. So please remember that. Julie is not a medical doctor either. She's got more things behind her name than I do, but she's an awesome gal. And I'm going to do a little intro that I think is important for us to remember. She is my friend, and we don't get to spend much time together. We met at some conferences, and it was just, those fast friendships. She's a licensed professional counselor in Grapevine, Texas. Oh, Julie Benvenuto is her name. Julie is my friend. But she is one of the most caring, knowledgeable people I know in the holistic wellness arena. When it comes to emotional wellness, she is my go-to person. That's who I contact when I have clients or situations I need a little input from. She spent 17 years of her life in ministry, and she has a deep passion for helping people heal on every level, mind, body, and spirit. She just this week received her PhD in natural health. So yay! So happy for you to get that because I know having a little guy working on your PhD is a big deal. But to me, that next step reflects your commitment in understanding how emotional and biological health intersect. So Julie has taught at churches, worked alongside religious leaders, even consulted for a major Christian television network. She believes, like I do, that illness in the mind, body, and spirit can create negative ripple effects in all aspects of life. So we're going to be diving into what happens during the holidays that we can support not only our emotional well-being, but our spiritual and physical well-being, because they all are so intricately tied together. So thank you for being here today, everybody. Thank you, Julie, for taking the time out of your busy day to share this with us. And I'd love for you to share kind of what you feel are the most important things to think about, remember during Christmas, holidays, Thanksgiving, when we're around people that sometimes we kind of have to be around, and how that works. This is a conversation, people, so please remember to put chat in there, likes, dislikes, all of those kind of things. I may even ask, raise of hands, how many people have experienced this or that. So what do you have to say for yourself, lady?
Yeah, thank you for that intro. And I'm so glad that you use the terminology, people we have to be around, because I think that that's one of the setups that kind of determines how well the interaction at the holidays is going to go. Because no matter how old we are, if we're going to our parents' house, for example, there's like a child trauma that activates just from the fact that we're no longer the authority in our world anymore. There's like this submissive tug that happens to us. And when I'm working with trauma patients, a trapped feeling or a powerless feeling, or the choice, the belief that I don't have a choice in what's about to happen, tends to snowball into other things. So if even as you're just starting your holiday gatherings, if you're starting out with the belief that you don't have a choice in the matter, we want to re-empower ourselves in that decision to say, okay, there's pros to being there and there's some cons to being there. It very may be likely that me choosing not to participate in an area that I don't feel safe in may create some new consequences for me. So maybe I am still choosing to go because I don't want to take on decades of conversations that we've been pushing on the back burner, but still reminding yourself that if you don't want to go, you don't have to. You're just weighing out, what are the battles I want to fight today? What are the battles that I want to fight another day? So that you're not starting this interaction from a place of powerlessness. That can be a really powerful start, in a negative way or a positive way.
Yeah. And I've had that situation before where I just did not want to be in an event and I went because I knew I kind of had to, or
Mhm.
there are certain family members that are harder to deal with.
Yeah.
And you wish you could not invite them, but that's not really a choice if you're the one hosting and you have to do that. Um, why is that such a challenge for people to kind of navigate that whole realm? I mean, I know as we mature, and I know everybody has baggage. Everybody has baggage. Admit it. If you don't want to admit it, then we're not in the right place because we all have baggage of some sort or another. But what do you think makes that the kind of the crux of why a lot of these holiday events can be difficult?
Mhm. Well, there's a few answers to that, but there's one lane in particular that I think is the loudest. And as an EMDR therapist, what I study is the
Okay,
connections.
I'm going to ask you to explain EMDR real
Yeah,
quick because a lot
yeah,
of people might not know that.
yeah, good point. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And many people who are familiar with counseling may associate counseling with you sit on a couch and you talk about your feelings. And some people are really resistant to counseling because it almost feels like you have to know what to tell the therapist about roots and why, and for it, in order for it to be effective. So when we're using EMDR therapy, and EMDR has some, I call them cousins of therapy to it. EFT tapping is a really great resource, and we can make these resources known to you or how to access people who do them, the more questions that this may pose for you. Um, so EFT and brain spotting are similar, so we can talk through those. But as the core of an EMDR therapist, what I study is the associations that the individual makes about how different events have happened. So I'll give you a quick example that doesn't have to do with family, and then I'll re-explain it. So a very common example in phobias had an intricacy in that a lady came in wanting EMDR on a phobia related to fruit. And everybody's like, why are you afraid of
Phobia
fruit?
related to fruit?
Yeah, just completely terrified. Autonomic nervous system lights up every time somebody suggests, or she's even in the room with fruit, all kinds of things. So you would assume that she had a bad experience with fruit, and she's genuinely saying, I've never like there's nothing bad that's directly happened with fruit. So keep in mind that people have even more of what I'm about to talk about. So we go through the EMDR processing, and her brain tells us that what happened was she was about 6 years old, getting ready to climb the slide to a pool and jump into a diving board, from a diving board into the pool. And as she was about to do that, her sister came up behind her and bit her in the butt. And it startled her, and she fell in the pool. So she's choking on water. So her nervous system recorded this fleshy bite, and it replayed the overwhelming sensation of the fruit bite that she experienced later on in life and pulled up that file again. So when we're with people, there's a lot of traumas that we know for sure happened, and there is 95 more that we don't remember happened, that the brain made an association that attached to your nervous system. It changes your cortisol, it messes with your gut microbiome, sends your nerves all wacky when you're around people, because all the files that your body is pulling up on that person or even that feeling is something more than just what your conscious memory can acknowledge. So we have to have a certain respect for the body and how it works and how it records things, and even just take a step back and not come at our feelings about our family from a place of judgment of I should be above this. If I was really healthy, I'd be able to mind over matter this, because that shame and that judgment is already setting you up for another negative experience, because you're starting out that family interaction criticizing yourself for what you should be able to do, or what your relationship with God tells you you should be able to do, or the people in your life tell you you should be able to do. So you're already going in on the defense because you're already upset with yourself, when in fact your body's just making the connections that it thinks it should make to make you feel safe.
And those physiological connections are so powerful. And there are, I've had so many situations with taking care of clients, and I'm not a therapist, counselor, or anything like that. I have done an entire counseling program through our church that was 36 weeks at one point. And we program ourselves, not just our mind, to do certain things. And that trauma response can be something that we can actually physically take control of much easier a lot of times than mentally, logically processing something. I have had an EMDR session before, and it was interesting. I didn't feel like I really got anywhere because I wasn't really in a bad situation that I was needing some help with. But it made me think about trauma in a little different way. And a trauma for one person is not a trauma for somebody else.
So true.
And the crazy thing is something like, getting bit in the butt and falling in a pool is a traumatic thing. But even if she hadn't fallen in the pool, there could have been that trauma that was still there because she didn't understand at that age or be with someone who could help process through that. And that's one of the things I think is amazing about EMDR and counseling is you're going around the situation so that it's not just a logical thing that you have to deal with. And I think that's one of the things that's hardest for most people when they go into counseling. It's dredging up all of these emotions. But when you are going a roundabout way and talking about something else that can lead back to that and help with that healing with the physicality as well as the other, that's what I think is just so beautiful about God's design and counselors who are trained in EMDR and focus on that. I think it's an amazing program. And just so y'all know, Julie is in Grapevine, Texas. She's licensed to help people all over Texas. She is not licensed to help in other areas, but I'm sure we would be able to find somebody, and she's got connections, I got connections. So if we need to do anything anywhere else, but be aware that a lot of times when it's something that is deep-seated that's from a long time ago, you may not even know what it is that caused it. Having somebody that does EMDR and a couple of the other techniques, I think EMDR is extremely powerful. I've had some great results with clients that just spectacular things that changed, confidentiality, can't share a lot of that information, but it's a great tool to use. And connecting that physical and emotional is so valuable. So when someone is going to see family, for instance, and they're the ones that have always been pushed aside, negated, things like that. And you need to go because if you don't, then you don't have the family. And, being from California, family was kind of like, whatever. Texas, it's a big deal when you're with family all the time. And that's a huge part of that culture. Here in Arizona, doesn't matter that much either. But one of the things that I find really useful is when we go into those kinds of situations, do we need to know what our triggers are, or do we need to suit up with an armor before we go in? What are some of the things that you think would be most pertinent to start with and then see how things go as we discuss those kind of things?
Good question. So a lot of what comes up with these interactions is the topic of boundaries. And a lot of us know that boundaries are important. And I have many clients tell me, part of the problem is that I don't stick to my boundaries. I let people walk all over me and all of that. kind of stuff. We can relate to that. And then there's some of us who are really, really hard about our boundaries. And in some cases, it actually creates a new problem because you're pretty isolated because nobody wants to, abide by your rules. So the topic of boundaries is helpful in this, but one of the things that I don't think is addressed in open conversations about boundaries is that it actually starts with your boundaries with yourself. A lot of times when we're dealing with family, there's those undercurrents of resentment. My voice is not heard. My opinion doesn't matter. I'm not important. I'm not loved. There's all sorts of
You're the
conclusions.
youngest, you don't count. That's what
Yeah.
I've had situations where I've been in, I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
That's just not
Well,
right.
and in that, you're making a good point because you said so well, one event is not traumatic to the other person and it could be life-shattering for the other one. Really, what trauma is decided by is meaning. So you may be sitting in this webinar thinking, man, I haven't really had any trauma. I just don't, my family and I struggle. If you've taken meaning out of what your interactions with your family have done to you, there's a trauma component there that you want to work on. And so addressing your boundaries with yourself is just as important as addressing the family boundaries that you have with the people around you. Because I could, for example, say when I wake up that I am going to go get on the rowing machine for 10 minutes. And then when I wake up, I'm not feeling that great. I've just disrespected my own boundary and shame has started to set in. So if you start out shaming yourself because you don't even follow your own boundaries, you're going to be less likely to have the self-esteem that's necessary to stick up for yourself in a boundary with a family member who may be in a position of power over you and may create some really scary consequences for you because you feel like a child again when you're around them. So understanding the conversations that you have with yourself and about yourself and what it means about you, and remembering that there are just things that you cannot mind over matter because your body needs to deal with them, with help, with guidance, either through counseling. Sometimes even inflammation on the brain will just make this part difficult. You could mind over matter it if, we get your glucose levels down. There's lots of factors that can happen in that, but you can't be upset with yourself for not handling this when there are so many facets that come into play here. But remembering that your body's doing what it's doing for a reason. It needs help. It needs support. It's doing the best it can with what it has to work with. But also remembering that everybody in your family is really looking out for number one. They're more shame-filled and self-loathing than you are going to think, even if they're presenting as a narcissist. There's something going on in their world that doesn't mean anything about you, but because of the meaning you're taking out of it, and that's not to say that you're making something out of nothing, but that's where we get lost is I'm only loved if they respect my boundary. I'm only appreciated or I'm only valued if they do this, when they just may be a selfish person. You just can't.
And I think that's important. You're talking about boundaries with yourself, but I think one of the things that we tend to do, I think as women, maybe I'm totally wrong. Tell me if I'm right. Okay, y'all put it in the chat if you think I'm right about this. We have expectations that things are going to be great. And when we set these expectations of people who can't meet those expectations, even ourselves, I think I just did a diet program, which it was really difficult. It's still difficult. I timed it really bad. I can't have any starches or sugars until December 30th. Nothing like the total baking season that I love every year to not be able to bake anything. And I can't bake and not eat it. But, I would love for you to, in the chat, do you feel like you have good expectations with yourself and with your family, or is expectation something that we need to deal with? Because I don't know if that's the direction we need to go in our discussion, or is it really the boundaries that we put, for ourselves and others? For me, one of my current boundaries is I gotta avoid that starch and sugar. And the thing is I probably physically could have that, but it's an integrity issue for me if I am having these other things and not having these things that I shouldn't be having, because literally this diet is very, very strict. So I don't want to ruin what I've done. But there's an integrity aspect too. If I am not doing it, how am I going to ask somebody else that wants to do this diet program to do it? Because I need to be living in my integrity. So when I go to family events where I know someone is going to be there that I don't really want to have interaction with, or if somebody that I may love and I want to have interaction with them, but I have these expectations that may be different. I had somebody recently, because I had an interaction with a family member, and they go, "Well, what did you expect?" And I went, "Oh, I didn't expect the right thing. I didn't have the right expectations." And I think those are expectations for ourselves and for others. But where do you think that lies within boundaries and expectations? Are those super interrelated, or are they kind of more separate?
They're very interrelated. So let's take the female dynamic that you were kind of proposing. And this isn't every woman, but commonly we will, as women, say, well, my husband, if he really loved me, he would know what I need. So we have an expectation.
I've been married 30 years. Good luck with that. And I love him. I absolutely love him. And he's just on the other side of that wall there. But yeah.
Yeah. So there's an expectation that then leads to boundaries of, well, I'm not really going to give you all my heart then, because you don't seem to care about what is important to me. You want me to spell it out for you. So the expectations are the precursor to the boundary.
Okay. Yeah. How do we set the right expectations and then make sure that we have the right boundaries? Like with your spouse, you want to be whole hog in that relationship, but with other people that you aren't living with on a daily basis or need to interact with regularly.
That's a really great question. And I'm sure you could imagine that the expectations we have of Uncle Joe are going to be different from the expectations we have from our mom and the expectations we have from our brother. And it's going to be very, very individualized. But I think that a lot of times in this situation, if we just start out asking questions, because the boundary that you need this December with your family may be very different than the boundary that you need from your family next December, because you're going to be in a different place. Your body's going to be in a different place. Your self-esteem's, excuse me, going to be in a different place. So just acknowledging the fact that you don't have to know everything about what you need to survive your family for this one holiday. It's more so scaling back to say,
Amen.
For this day, what is one thing that's going to help me feel less trapped, feel less powerless, feel less small in this dynamic? And I had a client that her family lived out of town, so she had to fly to go see them. But she made a decision: the money that I pay for a hotel is going to cost me less than me feeling like I'm under their roof again. And she had to fight a battle in why she wasn't staying in their house, but her ability to decompress when she left whatever the festivity was for that day, she just decided, for this trip, I need to be in a hotel room so that I can put the pieces together on what I've grown in and what I've worked on, and then I can, have some alone time to kind of figure out what I need for the next day.
Yeah, and bite-sized pieces too. There are so many entangled things when it comes to family relationships. Having those bite-sized pieces will make a bigger difference. So what are some bite-sized pieces that you think would be helpful for everybody to be kind of chomping on to right now for the holidays?
Good. Yeah, and I think this time.
Or do we need to address personal boundaries first, or do you think boundaries for family? You know your stuff better than I do, so.
I think we could weave them together, and this ties into Sonia's question about how to shield ourselves. I think first, just having a conversation with yourself. Let's say that you're seeing family next week. A bite-sized piece.
Do you suggest people do it out loud?
It can help. Actually, you probably know about this. Cells respond to sound. So even just hearing your own voice say it. But as women, we do tend to be perfectionists. So knowing we're going to have to say it out loud, it's okay if you want to put a rough draft in a journal or whatever and start declaring what you need. Um, but if you were, let's say you were seeing your family next week and you said, okay, I don't want what happened last year. I don't want what happened at Easter or Mother's Day to happen again. Right now, I want to just acknowledge that I am doing everything I can with everything that I've been through to be able to navigate these relationships. So let's turn down the volume on self-shame, because when that hemisphere of the brain is overactive, your logic and reasoning centers can't actually problem solve.
Yeah.
So meeting your own emotion with emotion and acknowledging I have these big emotions for a reason. I may not always feel like this, but right now I do. Giving your brain, throwing it a bone on the emotion can actually unlock some of the logic and reasoning centers of your brain. So if we start there, you may have an idea come up that says, you know what, now that I think about it, I'm looking at this as a whole holiday, when in fact, my family dinners are 2 hours. So I don't have to look at this as even a week of
Especially if you're staying at a hotel.
Yeah, yeah. So what do I need for 2 hours? And maybe that plan is another small bite is when I get there, I'm going to put my purse on the chair that's, in this part of the house, because I'm going to feel like I have more space to move around or shift my legs or, just kind of figuring out for those 2 hours, what would make me feel better in that moment.
I love
And
that.
just, simplifying it.
Well, and two, avoiding people. And
That's
is
it.
is one of those really simple things to do. Um, Certain family members that I am not fond of spending time with, but I know that that will be, an interaction that needs to take place. I'll give them a hug and I'm like, glad that you made it, glad you were well enough to be here. And then I really don't interact with them the rest of the time. Don't, my head just went somewhere. So on Seinfeld, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this one, but it was one of the early episodes of Seinfeld. Jerry and Elaine were at a party, and she said, "What's your sign? What's the sign we're going to use in case we're trapped by someone who's bending our ear off?" And especially if you have someone that can help you with that.
Yeah.
And I think if you have another family member that you can
Good
enlist
point.
to be a support with that,
Mhm.
their thing was they pat their self on the top of the head,
Yeah.
which, you're like, that's kind of silly. But I've done that with my husband when we've been at a party
Yeah.
before where I'm like, someone's monopolized me and I can't stand it anymore. I go like this and he'll come and rescue me.
That's
So I
good.
think there's different things, and that actual physicality matters too. And Dr. Amy Apigian or Apigian, I don't even know how her last name is pronounced. Usually it's like, I'm assuming it's an Armenian name, so it would be generally Apigian, but she has a trauma course. It's called the Biology of Trauma, and they teach different somatic exercises. And so within those things, all of us learn differently. Like you were saying, write it down and speak it aloud. We learn kinesthetically, which means our physical body is involved. We learn auditory and we learn visually. So if you're writing, you are kinesthetically and visually working together. And then if you say it aloud, you're using all of those tools.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter which is the best for you personally. I am very even with all of them. Any score test I've ever done, I'm like close to the middle. So it's not like you give me one thing and I'm okay. I need all of it. And some of the things that she uses in that course were really powerful in making space for yourself. There's a lot of different tools that were somatic exercises. And one thing too, when you were mentioned sitting a chair by the door, one of the things that I have used with clients when they came into the office and they were stressed, I will have them walk around the room and touch things around the outside of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called marking your territory.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look for monsters. Is there something behind there? Look and see whose purse is sitting on that one, or whose jacket or coat or whatever, if you need to do that, and kind of check the space out beforehand. And I think that's a very empowering tool to use. And I think being smart about where you sit, who you're sitting by, and if you need a route of escape, I tend to be the person that's near the door because if I need to get away, I want to get away.
Yeah.
Um, So what other kind of boundary tools, picking one thing to be set on when we go into an event, what if um, you've had battles or confrontations with people before at family events? Do you engage? Do you not engage? Where do you lie with kind of that battle scenario? Because that
Mm.
does happen for some people. And I don't know, put questions in the chat, people, if you have any questions. And if you want to do it directly to me instead of having people know who put that in the chat, that is totally fine. And I will not use your name when it comes to questions that you have put directly to me. But um, anything in particular about if you feel like you might have a battle on your hands and
Mm.
somebody who's been contentious?
Yeah, so there isn't really an across the board rule on, just go ahead and, give it back to them kind of thing, because you need to defend yourself. Take domestic violence, for example. You could be putting yourself in a much more difficult situation if you address your accuser. It could get very bad for you. So I think it really depends on capacity. And so I'll zoom back out a little bit and circle back to what you said that was really powerful of what are you capable of doing before that interaction that will help you feel either empowered or at peace with not doing anything or addressing something. So let's say, for example, if you feel like, gosh, I'm going to be really anxious and fidgety, what I need before I see them is to go for a 30-minute walk and, detox some toxins out of my system that are already there because I've been stewing about this thing. Interesting thing about the brain is it doesn't always know the difference between fantasy and reality. So if you've rehearsed having a fight with that person 15 times,
Or
when,
relived.
yeah, your body is going to respond both on a trauma scale and on a toxin scale as if it's really happening. So then when you do actually fight with them, it feels like time number 16 and not, family Christmas time number 3 that you guys have fought or whatever. I'm overgeneralizing. So we can do some of those things, but again, it really depends on your capacity. If you're sitting there and you're practicing some mindful techniques of like, oh, I can touch this, oh, the wall is blue, and you're getting your mind off of an anticipatory trauma by rehearsing all of this,
Yeah.
and you're centering yourself and you're feeling good. Again, the logic and the reasoning centers of the brain are going to help you feel like, okay, right now the best thing for us to do is to go outside and play with the kids on the yard. That's our best yes right now. You'll be able to problem solve through that when you don't have all of the emotional centers of the brain capping your logic and reasoning centers. So to
I
use an
love that.
example in family members, particularly your father's going to be really difficult because it's a place of authority. Again, your brain is pulling 95 things that you don't even really know that it's involving. All the things that you know about are just what you have in your conscious mind. So it really depends on what you want in your relationship with your father. And in tying that into honor, what is your belief about what God expects you to do? Because the God that I serve wants you to honor your parents, but honor and reconciliation or honor and access to re-traumatize are not the same thing. So you could be kind to somebody that's a family member, but not allow them to be in a position to talk to you in the way that they've talked to you. So it might look something like, again, depending on how volatile the person is. Dad, I know we have a lot of history and I know that there's a lot of emotions about what we're doing right now. I don't have the capacity to hear what you're telling me right now because what I'm going to say and how I'm going to react isn't something that's going to benefit both of us. So I can't have this conversation with you right now. I still love you as my dad, but the way that this is going, I don't think it'll be helpful for either one of us. And just be able to come at it from a place that gives you an out from a trapped feeling, but doesn't make you feel like you're just lashing out at him too, because your body needs to feel like you're addressing something, that you have a voice.
Yeah. And I actually have had the situation before where somebody was being very disrespectful every time that they talked to me. And I'm pretty much laid out a logical explanation and said, this needs to be addressed. And you have the choice of having me not enter the conversation with you or having this be my reaction to that. So I know when you've got a very dominant person in your family that is kind of the controller, that isn't always the easiest thing to do. But I think, like you were saying, going into it logically and having that emotion separated. I learned when my kid was really little that if a child is crying, you don't talk to them and try and logic them about anything. You have to get them past that emotion, and then we can work.
Right.
I don't know
adults.
Well, but that's the thing. It's like we're all children.
Yeah.
We're all children, and we have those same physiological reactions. And that difficulty is not just that moment, but like you were saying, the previous things that have been going on. Something that I do, and I don't know if you do this with your clients, so this is a new thing maybe for you. I don't know. You probably already know all about this. Your fingers control emotions and they control the organs of your body. And so your thumb is worry, stomach, and spleen. So if you're the person that gets nauseous at family events, hold your thumb. It's a great tool, but that's a worry situation. And if you're going into, like you were saying, flying to an event, and you know you're going to be around people and you're worried about it, hold your thumb. And it is really a powerful tool. Like, it's funny, people don't believe me until I say, do it. Have a kid hold their ring finger when they're bawling their head off. Just grab their hands and put them together, hold your finger. They can do that because it's an action, kind of a thing. But so worry is your thumb. Your index finger is fear. And that one is kidney and bladder. So if you're having kidney and bladder problems all the time, fear might be what you need to hold. Your middle finger is anger. And something that I do when I am in a situation where I'm very frustrated, because it could be frustration with myself or with others, I will hold my middle finger, and it won't necessarily be in front of my body. Sometimes I'm like this, holding it behind my back. They don't have to know, and they don't even know that your middle finger you're holding it for control of that anger and supporting your liver and gallbladder. Ring finger is sadness and grief, and that's your lungs and your large intestine. So the easy way to remember that is when someone gets a really bad cry and they're like, they can't stop crying. There you go. Hold that ring finger. And I even use this when I'm at church and I'm singing, and during worship, I start crying. I'll hold my ring finger so that I'm not crying anymore. And it works. And it's not like there's sadness with that. And your pinky is striving and effort. If you feel like you're always putting the effort in, and it's your heart and your small intestine, so sometimes holding that. I love that those physical things can be integrated too. And something I think we forget when it comes to emotional stuff that we had discussed earlier was making sure that you're prepping yourself for an event. So those physical things that you do at an event. Number one, alcohol is not your friend. It is not going to make you feel better. So what are things that when you are going to something that's a holiday event that you think we need to be addressing or paying attention to or setting personal boundaries for, that we can do as far as, like you had said, getting yourself prepped beforehand so that you've got that emotion. But what about physical things that we can do to help with that feeling of calm and peace, and actually more enjoyment from that? Because I know a lot of people don't have family. We have had situations where it's just my husband and I, and sometimes he doesn't feel like going. So I'll go to something by myself if I feel like I want to. I'm a little more independent than other people that way, but what are some boundaries that we can create for ourselves that can be physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, maybe, or ways that we can guide ourselves to have a better situation we're going into?
Good. Yeah, I'll use the example of what you did in holding a certain finger for a certain emotion to say one of the keys to why that's helpful, just one of the aspects, is because when you're doing that, you're not suppressing emotion. You're not just shoving it down and saying, screw you, emotion, I'm going to deal with this, because that's actually going to make your brain more reactive when it feels like you're not addressing something. So when you're doing something physical to acknowledge, hey, I'm feeling really anxious right now, your body will turn down the volume on the emotion a little bit because it knows that you're doing something about it. So it's not going to overactivate because it thinks you're avoiding and suppressing. So whether that's holding the fingers, like Dr. Kari talked about, one of my favorite tools that I mentioned briefly is called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. One of the best investments you can make for yourself is to get an app called the Tapping Solution. I don't have a professional relationship with them or anything. This is just one of my favorite things. The Tapping Solution, because you'll use acupressure points and you'll be able to use dialogue with yourself to do a 10-minute trauma session on yourself. And it's not as invasive, or it doesn't dive as deep, but it's a little bit more of the emotional Tylenol that you can use. And they'll take you
I
through an
love that.
avatar to where to tap and how to tap. I think it's like $100 a year, which is like 3 insurance copays. You're going to make that bad boy up. So the Tapping Solutions are really, really great resource. You could even just do like jot something down in what you're thinking about, because the brain, again, just wants you to acknowledge what's happening. So if, let's say, I'm leaving here and I have to go meet a family member for lunch, if I just write down here on my desk, I'm worried that she's going to judge me for blah, blah, blah. There's something about handwriting that the brain says, okay, you've acknowledged it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we have a solution for it right now, but there's an acknowledgement here. I will, kind of take a back seat so that you can function through this event. And as Christians, it's hard to do that, or whatever faith you're a part of. There's a lot of shoulds that are battling those things, like just even acknowledging the fact that I'm upset about this. There's some shame attached to it. I mean, the rabbit hole goes super deep on these things, but
One, it's
those
that
are some,
perfectionist, like,
yeah.
and I think honestly that we get worse as Christian women about thinking perfectionism is what is expected. The world does not expect perfection.
Mhm.
God for sure does not expect perfection because he already took care of that with Jesus. But we put that on ourselves and it's funny because I used to be one of those people that I would have a party and everything had to be perfect. I don't have people over to my house and let them bring food because I like to cook and I want to be, that person that has like this great spread and a great party, all of that. And I used to freak myself out about events. And Thanksgiving this year, it wasn't like it was a big event, but my turkey was done almost an hour late. And so all of the side dishes were cold. And I'm like, whatever. And it's training our bodies to have correct expectations and to set ourselves up for something in the way that we should. I know some of the people that are on the call, their expectations with family gatherings are, oh, this is going to be horrible. But I love that you have brought up, set that expectation ahead of time. How much time are we really going to be there? What can you do? I think making space to be able to escape if you need to do that.
Host it at your house if you feel more
Oh, no,
empowered
because
in your space.
then they're not, and
Well,
I
so
can't
yeah,
shove them out fast enough.
but ask the questions of, is being in their territory going to make me feel unsafer? Then I
Oh,
can at least ask the question of what would help.
I
It's
love
more
that.
solution oriented.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've never thought about it that way. It's always been, no, I don't want you to be at my house.
Yeah.
If I don't,
Depends
if
on the
we know it's
person.
going to be a hard
Yeah,
interaction, I'm
maybe
like,
somebody says I need it to be at their house so that I can exit the situation. Just the
but that's a
point is that
beautiful
you're
concept I
asking the
hadn't thought of.
question.
That's great. I love
Yeah.
that, Julie.
Yeah.
Other thing too, would be make sure that you're hydrated. I know this, anybody that knows me just gets sick and tired of me saying, make sure that you have enough water. But honestly, that hydration is super important for your brain to function well. Um, Functioning at full capacities is not the easiest thing for a lot of people because their brain is dehydrated. Get enough water on a regular basis. Don't drink
Sleep.
tons of coffee and tea or alcohol because that will shrivel that part of your brain. Well, it shrivels the whole brain, and you can't rehydrate it. It's like taking a raisin. Yeah, it used to be a nice plump grape, but once it's a raisin, you can put it in water. It ain't going to be that plump grape anymore. It may get mushy, but it doesn't work the same way. So what about other things as far as food or drink or any things like that? If, like if someone has an eating situation where they're like, oh, I'm going to eat everything, or I'm, bulimia or something like that, where there is a lot of emotion tied even with food or with alcohol, how do we put on the full armor of God for that kind of situation?
Mm. Well,
I know
you're
that's
talking.
a much more big thing because every person's going to be different with that.
Every person's going to be different, but I think what is especially valid in that is that the brain does not organize information by event, it organizes it by emotion. So let's say that you have a eating disorder and you're particularly shameful about that, and you're already having shameful conversations with yourself about food. And then you go and you sit amongst a bunch of people that you feel ashamed about behaviors that have happened. Then you're going to need to cope. You're going to
Yeah.
require more coping mechanisms through that. So just even acknowledging what you're struggling with and why and who's it actually attached to, those things can be powerful. But again, the brain will help you if you just acknowledge what's happening. It's when we try to mind over matter things and really suppress these emotions that we act in ways that are going to potentially make the situation worse. And one thing I'll circle back to, it's not exactly what you were talking about in this one, but I think it's important. Nobody can offend you if you don't already agree with them.
Ooh.
So if you already believe that you're a screw up, if you already believe that you are not lovable, it doesn't matter how somebody treats you, it's just going to add to the pile. So if in these gatherings, whether it's with food, with water, if you haven't slept well, nobody can behave on 4 hours of sleep. You can't judge yourself and expect yourself that perfection to function when those things aren't at play. But they can't insult you if you address your beliefs about yourself. And so if you take that on and if you get help in navigating, why do I have such a low interpretation of my value? You will be able to tolerate whatever the other person is doing because you've already taken capacity and redistribute it and taken that shame off, or whatever the emotion is, anger, guilt, resentment, sadness. When you address how you feel about you, your tolerance for their short-sightedness is going to be much larger.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think we sell ourselves short way too often and
Yeah.
think that somebody has control that they don't have. And there's always an exit. You can always walk out. It may be really cold outside if it's snowing or raining or whatever, but you can always walk out.
Yeah.
And I think that physical stepping aside, getting that moment to get your breath, get your boundary, and then have that brain separation where if that emotion is getting to be too much. And two, I think when you step out of a situation physically, sometimes it's a mental step out, sometimes it's a physical, but I think when we physically step out and take that break when someone is being disrespectful to us or we're feeling stressed in a greater degree, that helps to kind of compartmentalize it and not like we, put everything in blocks and leave them in a little block. But taking that step can be such a tool because you're physically escaping it. And I have had that situation before where I need to get outside. I'm going to go for a walk. Anybody want to go for a walk with me? Because I know that person that I'm having issues with won't go for a walk. So I'm like, anyone go for a walk with me? And then if nobody does, I'm like, okay, that's fine. And you may say, I'm going to go for a walk, and nobody else wants to, but you're still interacting. And then when you are outside, you can say those things to yourself verbally. I am valued. I am loved. I am not being disrespected. This person just has issues that they can't work through because they aren't empowered to do so. And I think when we take that step back and honestly go, what does the Lord have for me? He loves me enough to die for me on the cross. He created this whole universe of from creation to, Jesus' second coming because he wants to spend time with me. He created me for a reason and I have value. And I think when we can take that break from demeaning either ourselves or somebody else demeaning us, and we have that conversation with God and take that time to honor what he has made in you because he's made you just the way you are. You feel the things that you do because he created you that way. But we also have that control to step aside. So do you think exiting, we've talked about how to come into a situation and how to deal with it when they're there, but how do we exit a situation if we feel personally, physically, endangered or emotionally? Are there specific strategies to take an exit?
Yeah, and again, it kind of depends on your expectations. So I'll use another example, not holiday related, but you can fill in the blanks. So I had a lady that was trying to overcome perfectionism, approval addiction, trying to stop saying yes to everything. She decided this Saturday, I am going to have a chill day. I am just so excited to self-care on this Saturday. And she finds out that her mom has volunteered her to help her friend move for the Saturday. So just super
That's
defeated.
not relaxing.
Yeah, not relaxing at all. So the movement can be like, okay, I'm starting to feel bitter. I'm trying to take care of myself. My mom has no respect for, my personal life, my stress level, my fatigue level, all that. We can go down all of that role. But I stopped her and I said, do you feel good helping? And she said, well, yeah. And I said, will you feel guilty if you don't help? She said, yes, I will. And I said, okay, so what we need to figure out is how this isn't going to be a lose-lose situation. Because if you set up a boundary here, you're actually going to torture yourself for not being helpful because we're going against your helpful nature. But we also can't say yes to the degree that it turns into resentment. So the way that she came up with that solution was, okay, I'm going to tell her that I'm going to help her for 3 hours in the morning. And then after that, I'm not available. So it scratches the itch of being useful, being needed, being helpful. I don't feel like I'm being a jerk to everybody because they got to obey my boundaries, but I'm not doing this yes with resentment and expectation to the point where I give up my whole Saturday and then I hate life and hate everybody and I broke a boundary with myself. So we've got to ask those
That
questions
would
and
not
figure
be
out.
self-care for sure.
It wouldn't. It wouldn't. So exiting can be a physical exit. It can be, I ate with them and I didn't just eat and run. We've been sitting here for 30 minutes. The conversation is still about something that is not profitable to me. I can go ahead and make my exit now because I scratched the itch of a dutiful family member, but I don't have to sit here and stay and feel powerless and have to make this a 6-hour ordeal just because I don't want to be the first person to leave. So to figuring out what your needs are, what your expectations are there can be helpful.
Do you recommend, and this is something that I personally would do, sorry to any of you ever have me sit in this situation, but I will set like, hey, I'll be there from here to there, this kind of time, but we need to be leaving at this point because I've got something else on my calendar. You can be the other thing on the calendar. And I think when you're going into one of those dangerous situations for yourself where it could be a little bit harder, you don't really want to be there in the same situation again and again and again. Sometimes using yourself as an excuse is a wonderful tool to step away and at a reasonable time because you set that expectation ahead of time. Yeah. So I think sometimes leaving on a high note where things haven't gone bad can be a really good tool too, because then your expectation for the next one isn't going to be as bad.
Yeah.
So for me, I use myself, I say, I've got something that I got to be going to, or I have to do something, tomorrow morning. So I need to make sure that I'm home by this time or, whatever. It's not a lie because I have created a plan for myself. So do you think that's lying to people? Maybe I'm lying to people,
Mm-mm.
or
Nope, sure don't. I think it's fabulous because again, it takes out the powerlessness. It takes out the permanence of this day, and it says, I've told them I'll be there for 2 hours, and then I can do whatever I want to do for me, whether it's watch TV or play with my kid or color or whatever. Like I've got something to look forward to, or even a reward, that
go
says,
do a workout too right afterwards, maybe,
yeah,
so that
detox,
you're
all of that
get
stuff.
that physical energy
Mhm.
out as well. Because I think
Yeah,
incorporating all of it can be such a great tool for us to
yeah.
make sure that we're doing what we need to. I love what you said, Sonia, with the mantra, I'm sorry, please forgive me. I thank you, I love you. Saying
Mhm.
that to yourself is a big deal.
Mhm. Right.
And sometimes we need to say those same things to somebody else or something. And it may not be telling them that. We need to do that in our heads so that we have that peace with dealing with that person, interacting with them. And you never know what kind of blessing you're going to be to somebody else later on.
Mhm.
The fact that you didn't blow up, the fact that you were pleasant around them and maybe even laid down some law, depending on what situation you're in,
Yeah.
can be a useful tool for them to open doors and even be a witness and a testimony of Jesus's representation and Jesus's forgiveness of us, that we need to forgive others and be that light and salt. Um, Anything else that you guys want to ask, please put something in the chat. Anything that you found helpful. I'd love to know what you were like, yeah, this is best. Oh, Sonia, I loved what you were talking about. Drink magnesium calm beforehand. That can be a really good tool. Absolutely a great tool to use. What
Well,
did
and you just reminded me too, another cool thing to do was, a lot of us have family. We have our friends that are now our adopted family too. So
oh
maybe you just schedule a call with them that says, you will not believe what I survived, and celebrate the wins
yeah,
of like, old me would have done this, but this time I did this, but now I got to acknowledge that this, was really, really tough, but I did it. Building trust with yourself, and
I
no
love
win is too
that.
small to celebrate.
And celebrating with somebody and having them praying for you while you're
Yeah.
in the trenches.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. I love
Yeah.
that idea.
Yeah. Well, and here's what it's doing, whether that's a phone call with a friend or even just prayer to acknowledge it, is that I got this from a really cool, it was on the Bible app, and I think it was called Pride and Shame. But really, when we're thinking about ourselves, we feel really alone because we've got this ego thing going on. Pride is, my needs matter. Everybody needs to respect my boundaries, blah, blah, blah. And then shame is, I don't matter. Everybody else is more important. And as women, we tend to treat other people better than we treat ourselves. And we have more empathy for people than we have for ourselves. So just even asking yourself, would I talk to myself the way that I talk to somebody that I love? Would I be saying the things here? Because really what that means is that we're stuck on the pride shame dynamic. But when you depersonalize it and ask those questions of, the way I'm talking to myself, is that the way I would talk to somebody I love? Is the person I'm afraid to see at this event, do they treat everybody this way? Because that really does tell me it's actually not about me. Like this is their mantra. This is their lane that they stay in. And even though it's hurtful to me, and I do need to acknowledge that in my self-care with help, all of those things, getting off of that spectrum of, I either have to be prideful or shamed, and we swing back and forth. God, what do you want me to do in this moment? How would
Absolutely.
I talk to other people? How would I talk to myself? Is the person involved like this with everybody? When we depersonalize it, it gives us more space to think through it.
Absolutely. And Sonia had brought up earlier too, flower essences, essential oils, those can be really good. Essential oils, I mean, I love them, but some people are very scent sensitive. So going into a space where you have people that are very critical, then that might be a little thing to just, think twice about flower essences. There's nothing to that. And I use flower essences with my clients every appointment. They want another blend. Here, you get a new blend. It's all good. Lisa was asking about dealing with family trauma. Should we work through it? I personally, and this is, I'm not a counselor, so Julie gets to answer this too, but I personally think Any trauma that we have, physical or emotional or spiritual, needs to be dealt with because our cells remember. And when cells are not doing well, the liver, when you've got resentment, bitterness, anger, frustration, resentment is really gallbladder, but when you have those things going on, you have these little lines that show up. And mine, I've had really bad glasses for a long time, so that kind of contributed it here. But I did a liver flush recently. A liver flush, it's a physical activity. I was sitting, and I did it when my husband was gone so that I didn't have to deal with him with asking questions and all that kind of thing. A liver flush is kind of one of those personal things that you do. Um, I was watching a movie and I was watching it, but it wasn't like I was so into the movie. But one part, this person did, one of the characters did something very disrespectful, and I was like, and I started bawling, and I'm like, what the heck? So that's the physical bringing out the emotional. Well, the emotional brings out the physical trauma too. So what would be your answer to someone with dealing with trauma? First off, I think honestly, if you've got some deep family trauma, you need to see a counselor personally to help have someone walk through it at a distance so it's not as personal, like you were saying, to kind of take that separation.
Dealing with trauma is profound, and in my training, the body gets sick on the emotional plane before it gets sick on the physical plane. Aside from structural issues and genetic issues, really this trauma and the subconscious role in not dealing with it is why we're all having to do liver flushes. It's why we're having to repair leaky gut. It's why we're having to do all of this, because our cognitive energy has been stuck in self-preservation for so long that cellular repair couldn't happen. So if you're here listening to this video, it's because you care about the mind and the body together. And if you have not dealt with trauma, you need to deal with it, because of the fact that you can only get so much better physically without addressing it, when in fact it very often is a root cause for what's happening. But what I would say is be prepared to deal with trauma at the capacity that you have to deal with it. I very, very often have people come into my office, they get better, they start feeling more confident, they have all of these successes. But the consequence of that is that often they file for divorce afterward, or they decide that they aren't going to go to family gatherings anymore because those people see their success and feel ashamed at what they haven't done, and the criticism actually turns up. The volume on the abuse in their families and in their marriages turns up because the people are ashamed at how well the other person is doing. It impacts their ego. So it can come with consequences. So find a counselor who can walk you through what you want to work on and what's safe to work on then at
And
that
what the
time.
body's willing to work on, because
Yeah.
that's one of those things when it comes to a physical detox or an emotional detox, your body can only handle so much.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to be putting yourself in the hospital
Yeah.
because of it. And it's not like that happens all the time, but sometimes with the emotional stuff, when you start to actually deal with it, all kinds of physical things can come out. And that's why, honestly, that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on the call today, Julie, because I think we have so many things that we deal with when it comes to family. And it's hard because it's family. They're your blood relation and you don't have anybody else that's your family. I have a lot of friends that are family. I've got a couple of people on this call that I consider family. And I think that we can always take guidance. I've always been very independent. It's okay, I do it. I'll take care of myself. And I have learned within the last few years, and considering my age, I'm in my late 50s, finally I'm accepting, coachability and being guided by people that are outside of me and can see things in a different way. One of my very good friends says, it's hard to read a label from inside the bottle. And a lot of times we're stuck in our circumstance, in our situation, and we can't see that label. But having someone like Julie, having someone like me, or there are a couple other natural practitioners that are on the call, and I appreciate you being there. Having someone to look at it from the situation from the outside is really important. And I will definitely refer people to counselors. And I love the fact that you do the EMDR. That to me is spectacular. You've taken that time to actually really learn the physical kind of things as well that you can do naturally to help come alongside somebody with that. So I'm going to put Julie's information on the chat real quick. So her phone number and her website. I hope this is right. If it's not right, tell me, I'll take it down.
That's correct.
Oh, yay. I found it on my own. I didn't even ask her. But I will put that in the notes from the video as well, so that on YouTube you will be able to contact her. And I know it might sound weird with me being a natural practitioner. I love to have, y'all as clients, but I also want to support people who do different things than I do and are capable of helping people in ways that I'm not. I've learned a ton of things today and little tools that I will definitely be using for my clients in the future, because I love those little tidbits of information. Um, there have been so many situations where, I'm like, Lord, give me the right information to give to somebody that's needing it today. And sometimes it's not for ourselves, sometimes it's not for a client, but sometimes it's for the person that's next to you, watching you and seeing how you interact. So know that God is using you, whether it's something that's happening immediately or in your heart, and he's changing your heart and your mind to be a better reflection of him, and be a beautiful representation of what he has created you to be. Because I think every single one of you has a special purpose and a special gifting that we need to do. Julie's got that like calm demeanor. She can take care of everybody nice and smooth. And she doesn't get, freaked out about stuff. The first time I met her, there was a little situation where I was not feeling good, and she had some emergency stuff in her glove compartment. And I'm like, thank you, because I switched cars. I didn't have my right vehicle with all of my stuff. And she has rescued me in that situation. But any other questions, let me know. If not, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. Thank you both. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate every single one of you. I love seeing names of people that I know and people that I don't know. So follow me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all at Dr. Kari Barron. And Julie, what's your social media stuff? Or are you not really into that right now?
I should be into it. Julie Benvenuto is the Facebook line. It's not updated a ton though, so you'll get in there. You may see a few funny things, but nothing really empowering. But more power to you for looking.
And you've been busy getting your PhD, and the fact that you finally got that all taken care of is amazing. Thank y'all. Have an amazing day.
Thank you.